Thanks, Kevin. Good morning. This is a great day. It's a special day here at the legislature for a whole bunch of reasons. When we were planning for the 100th anniversary of the building, we as elected officials had a chance to make some suggestions, and this was a hope that I had, a suggestion that I had. And in this job, one of the benefits is sometimes people write down the suggestions, and then a lot of work gets done by a lot of other people, and we get to a great day like this. So I just want to say good morning to all of you. Welcome Mr. Nielsen from the Opposition Caucus. Welcome to all the legislative colleagues, to Mr. and Mrs. Begg, to the family of our first Premier, Walter Scott. And I want to start with a question. What if we had to go back and do it all over again? What if we had to build this province from nothing, from what was here when Walter Scott first began his political career? We would need to find the right leader for a job that big. We would have to find someone who had great character, someone of intelligence, someone of courage and compassion, someone who had maybe signed both sides of a paycheck, someone of good judgment. We'd want someone who had the vision that was worthy of this province, someone who would govern wisely, who would examine issues carefully, but know when it was time to stop examining and start acting. Someone who would recognize the difference between the political and public interests of this province and honor, in measure, that difference. Someone who understood that while government could do many things, it ought not to do everything, that there was a role for the individual, that there was a role for community. We could hope for a person like that, but we would soon find, ladies and gentlemen, that that kind of leader is very hard to come by. These people are very rare among us. Today, we honor the fact, we give thanks for the fact that someone just like that came along just when we needed him most. More than a century ago, at the very beginning of the history of our province, there was the Honourable Walter Scott. And we are fortunate that fate brought him our way from Ontario. Because of his leadership, ladies and gentlemen, this province is living up to its creeds today. Because of his vision, this province is living up to the promise he campaigned on, actually, for peace, progress, and prosperity. Today, we are becoming what he called the great country, populated by what he called people with large ideas that he thought were necessary to create a lasting prosperity. Walter Scott's government built roads and bridges and schools and hospitals and a telephone system, our very first innovation agenda. His government strengthened agriculture. He built the University of Saskatchewan. He helped attract Walter Murray. His vision drove the College of Agriculture. And of course, he built this legislature, the heart of our democracy, the physical expression of our Premier's confidence and wisdom, the manifestation of the vision and the hope that he had. And he had a great hope for us. In his speech to the convention, where he was named his party's leader in August of 1905, Scott said he believed Saskatchewan would soon become Canada's, quote, banner province. And his supporters shared his optimism. In fact, the Regina leader reported that he was interrupted many times in that speech by wild applause and waving hats, and that the speech was fantastic. Now, he owned the Regina leader, which maybe is how you get good coverage in politics, I'm not sure. This morning we do honor Walter Scott for his foresight and his vision, but very, very importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we need to recognize today his sacrifice, which is not often talked about, even amongst historians, save for a few. The day he died in 1938, the Leader Post wrote, quote, "In the discharge of his public duties, Scott gave himself unsparingly to the detriment of his health and the actual risk of life itself," end quote. This is not hyperbole. He battled asthma, he battled periodic bouts of pneumonia, but most importantly and very significantly, he battled the challenges of very significant mental health issues, what one author called the fierce blackness of depression, that actually took him away from the building that he loved and the work that he loved because he simply couldn't do it. In fact, he missed the opening of his legislative building because he was battling mental health issues. Over time, the absences grew longer until he had to retreat from public life. There was an incident in the Legislative Assembly, and his beloved friend and deputy premier and his cabinet colleagues, his inner circle, encouraged him to leave again, to take some time for some therapy, and then wired him not long after to say it was time for a change and they were moving on. In the words of his biographer, of Gordon Barnhart, quote, Scott left office unhappy and feeling like a man who had been defeated from within. This might seem like a melancholy reflection on such a great day, but it isn't, ladies and gentlemen. It underscores his sacrifice. It underscores the legacy of our first premier who had battled through all of these things and helped build this great province. And it's a clarion signal to those of us today in terms of mental health awareness, because he achieved all of this and he had this battle without the benefit of modern medication or prognosis or therapy. And I think we're going to add to a plaque in front of this statue that highlights the importance of mental health and Premier Scott's legacy in this regard. So it's not reason to be sad, it's reason to actually further celebrate what our first Premier achieved. And so this morning, we do reach across the ages, and we bind this great man to our present and to our future. We proudly claim his legacy. Walter Scott is back at the legislature, not in a building named for him, not even in a tiny bust in the rotunda. We restore him to the prominence that he earned, that he so richly deserves. Today, our first premier comes home with this statue. This statue you're going to see in a moment perfectly captures his role as the architect of Saskatchewan. He was the right man at the right time, at the right place. Gordon Barnhart began his doctoral thesis on Premier Scott with this quote: "The fruits of Walter Scott's labors continue to be harvested in Saskatchewan, but few remember who planted the original seeds," end quote. We, even as we stand this morning amidst the crop of plenty into which those seeds have grown, this morning and for every morning after, we remember and we honor the planter, the Honorable Walter Scott. Thanks for coming this morning.